What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the early read week 9 betting preview. Going to do the episodes a little bit differently this week with a solo episode recording Monday night to post Tuesday, and then going to have a guest on for the Thursday show, a best bet show, talk some props, maybe craft a collaborative round robin, see if we could hit one more winner before the season comes to an end. So, going to do this one a little bit on my own, or all of it on my own, but going to still do it the same way. Going to do some my guy, not my guy, recap last weekend. Successful weekend. Looking back at my bets, I think a few fortunate outcomes, but I think it's evened out over the course of the season. Slight positive, stacking together some winning weeks now, trying to find a bit of a run here before the end of the regular season as we start to hit the stretch run. We're going to go through a handful of key games. Honestly, this is first slate in a few weeks that I would call underwhelming relative to what we've had the last few weeks in terms of consequential big games, but there's always bets to be found. So I'm going to talk through a few of the bigger high leverage games and then a few bets that I made myself, a little bit of a shorter episode relative than the usual hour and a half-ish episodes that the Tuesday morning episodes have become a staple of. So let's start with my guy from last week, and that's formerly ECU head coach Mike Houston. Mike Houston has since been fired since his 17-point loss against Army, but I'm going to remember Houston's tenure pretty fondly in Greenville, especially this season, despite many different lapses throughout the game, whether this is his fault or not, but how could I forget the blown lead against App State in late turnover, or the absolute meltdown versus ECU where they don't even cover a touchdown and change spread after leading 17-0 in the first half with a game that ended after 2 a.m. in the morning with a lightning delay in Blacksburg, Virginia. How could I forget that? But Houston, Team ECU, I was high on going into the year, and I think it was the right idea, but it just didn't come together with a lot of, like I just mentioned, some of those poor runouts and just too many turnovers from Jake Garcia. They go to Kane Hauser for this game against Army. I waited until Saturday morning to finally get involved on the ECU side. 17.5. They go down, I think it was 31-0. And they slowly creep back into the game. They end up cutting it to 18 with an insane touchdown grab with 2 minutes left. And ECU goes for 2 to make it, because they're down 24. They think 3 scores, but if you go for 2 and you get it 3 times, 8 times 3, you got 24, you tie the game. There's 2 minutes left. I don't know why the hell they were doing that. But anyway, they do it. They obviously don't get it. So they're on 18 now with 2 minutes remaining. They onside kick it. Onside kick. Army, it was such a bad onside kick that Army actually returned it to the ECU 15. I'm going to pull up the box score to make sure I get this all correct in terms of the full chaos of this backdoor. And if you had Army if you relate to the number, you bet Army minus 17.5, that I'm sorry for you. But let's see here. They onside kick it. Army returns it all the way down to the ECU 4. 4 minutes left. Army kicks the extra point. They're back up now 25. ECU with 4 minutes left. They go the length of the field. 4th and goal from the Army 12. Score. Get the 2. Down 17. Onside kick. Army picks up a first and runs out the clock. So ECU, I know they fired Mike Houston. I know the season got away from them. But I'm going to remember him fondly as my guy of week 8 because it took the scenic route for sure, but he definitely got the cover. And what I don't think I deserved was a cover for ECU. Army absolutely smashed them from the jump. But ECU, they got it done. Box score, it was garbage time literally for after the first quarter pretty much. So ECU erased a 31-0 deficit to cover the 17-point spread. Not my guy of week 9. And it's kind of, I want to talk about Texas, Georgia, so I made it not my guy, but this is kind of my guy because I took Georgia I was pretty high on them. I had them in the round robin. I took them on the spread. Probably should have stuck a little bit more to my guns that I thought the spread was a little ridiculous in favor of Texas, but I didn't. I ended up with just a regular bet on Georgia. Didn't even get the best of the number. But not my guy is Quinn Ewers of Texas. And before I recorded this, there was a false report that he was leaving to get ready for the draft, which is not true, already denied, but that would have been pretty funny. But I had my concerns about Texas, and I mentioned this when I was going through my handicap of the game, that if I downgraded Texas materially from last year, and this team hasn't played an offense with a real pulse yet, why are they getting so much love against Georgia, a team that has, in my opinion, more talent across its roster, a better quarterback, and I'm getting them as a dog when they were a favorite just a few weeks ago? And if they don't have a few turnovers go against them against Alabama, or they finish the deal against Alabama, aren't they favored in this game? I just thought that was a very big overreaction to what has happened so far this season. Texas, first sign of trouble, they get absolutely punched in the mouth. We've seen this all year long now, where teams with their first real sign of trouble really do struggle a little bit more than you would think. And Texas had the same thing. Ewers, he finishes the day 25 of 43, 211 passing yards, an interception, a fumble lost. He ends up getting benched in the first half for a drive for Arch Manning. That kind of seemed to jumpstart the Texas offense for just a second, but Arch was in way over his head too. Ewers, I'm not a Ewers believer. I never really have been. I think he's kind of a Sark merchant. And I think we saw, while Texas is a very good team, we saw the limitations that this team is going to have when you lose a handful of NFL receivers, you lose your best running back from last year and your best fill-in for last year, and your two best defensive linemen from last year. And I thought the Texas defense actually ended up showing up pretty nice in this game. They forced a bunch of turnovers. Carson Beck didn't even look that good, so I have to eat an L on that one again about Carson Beck, but Ewers looked way, way out of sync in that game. His first real test, and you go back through, I guess, Alabama last year, so maybe you have to slow down a little bit, but college football playoff last year was against Washington, a pretty soft defense relative to these elite teams. Went into Bama last year against a Saban defense, did cook, respect that. Beat pretty elite Michigan defense up, but when the opposition on the other side has no offense, it kind of changes the game plan a little bit. And Ewers played great against Michigan, no disrespect there, but this was a real punch in the mouth. And post-game quotes, I just thought it was a little strange. This has nothing to do with the reporting, and I'm looking way too far into it. But some interesting post-game quotes about Ewers getting pulled, Ewers getting thrown back in. It was just a little interesting, I thought. Something to maybe just keep in the back of your head as you go forward with Texas and where this season might go for Steve Sarkisian's Longhorns. On the other side, I think Georgia reminded everybody why they were the national championship favorite. I do think that the offense has some issues, but unlocking Trevor Etienne in the way they did really offset some of the concerns. But this passing game still looks a little clunky. I still like Carson Beck, but it's pretty apparent this team lacks a true game breaker that they've had in the past, that they lack a Brock Bowers. They lack a Ladd McConkey. I don't know if that guy is going to appear. I don't know, though, if that's your biggest question, I don't know if that's going to really – every other team has a fatal flaw. If the defense is going to play like that and Michael Williams is going to give you that kind of performance, maybe it won't matter as much because Georgia's defense can emerge and carry this team through the expanded college football playoff. And Carson Beck, who I still think is a first-round draft pick, can do enough to get this team over the hill. We've seen, and I was mentioning this either last week or 2 weeks ago on the pod, that the college football playoff is going to look more like the NFL playoffs in terms of its length, and that a juggernaut might not be able to run through it, but some team might get a good draw. Some team might be able to lean on one unit to really carry it through. Again, through every team, it looks like has a fatal flaw. Looks like it's going to not really stack in comparison to the rest of the country the prior champions we've seen. The Georgias with 7 first rounders on the defensive side of the ball, or whatever that was. The LSU Burrows, stuff like that. So if Georgia could really tap into that defense and get enough from Carson Beck and maybe unlock the Trevor Etienne offense, maybe a little bit more balanced, maybe not the one that's going to really run it up on you, Maybe that's how Georgia gets back to the national championship and wins their third title in 4 years. One thing I think is worth noting with Carson Beck, I know this was supposed to be like a Quinn Ewers thing, but I'm kind of going to recap the Texas-Georgia game. Last year, Beck played 72% of his passes, 15 big-time throws, 7 turnover-worthy plays according to Pro Football Focus. This year, that completion percentage is down to 65%. 12 big-time throws, so he's chucking it a little bit further down the field relative to last year and really taking a few more chances. But he has 11 turnover-worthy plays in half a season of work. So we're seeing Beck maybe not in sync with his receivers, maybe lacking a true safety valve like Bowers and McConkey. But he's also pushing it down the field more. The ADOT's up about half a yard. Nothing crazy, but that shows that I think, you're starting to see that spray chart starting to push down the field. I think Beck is still adapting to this receiving core that lost 2 high-end NFL caliber receivers and doesn't really have one right now. So I'm not pressing the panic button on Carson Beck going forward and when we project that into the NFL, but I do think that there's still a learning curve that maybe we underrated when looking at Georgia going into the season. That being said, game script independent, Georgia did play Alabama and Texas on the road and scored 30 plus in both those games. That's a credit to the Georgia team. So I'm not pressing the panic button just yet. I still think Georgia is the most complete team in college football and should be the national championship favorite. But in a year where there isn't a consensus favorite, Georgia seems to have the least amount of exploitable and fatal flaws. So let's move on now and talk about week number 9. Let's start with what I think is a super interesting game and what I don't think it's as much of an college football playoff. I don't think it's as much of a college football playoff eliminator, but Texas A&M and LSU are 2 teams that have kind of reinvented themselves on the fly. It seems like LSU now starting to tap into this defense of effort, ironically, since Harold Perkins, this highly touted NFL draft prospect, leaves the program. All of a sudden, LSU puts together 2 really, really sound defensive efforts against Ole Miss and Arkansas. Now facing Texas A&M, a team that we saw Connor Wegman come back from injury against Missouri and have the game of his career for sure. 18 for 22, 276 yards. But we did see against Mississippi State last week on the road, 15 to 25, 2 picks, 2 big-time throws to 4 turnover-worthy plays. Not a great look for Connor Wegman. We're going to talk about Mississippi State a little bit later, but I do find it interesting, like, where are we at with this Texas A&M offense that I thought maybe turned a corner after that Missouri game. You got Connor Wegman healthy. Maybe it was the shoulder injury that kept him out a few games that was holding him back. And maybe now this Texas A&M offense can cook and really get it going. We're going to see at home against LSU. This LSU offense is starting to put it together. I do lean with the Ags in this one. I'm just pressing the hold button on LSU's defense being so resurgent just yet. I think we're going to learn a little bit more about it this week. And I think I'm going to be on an island. I have not played Texas A&M myself. We're now inside of 3, so I find myself maybe we're probably getting to that bye point. I'm going to, again, not a play, but something I have considered. Let's just go back and look at LSU. Defense, Ole Miss. They play Ole Miss on their 7th straight game on the road. They give Jackson Dart some trouble. They suffocate him. They win a grinder, but Ole Miss, that game was chaotic. Full credit to them, but it was a really nice setup for LSU to have a good effort there. We had LSU in that game. They then go on the road to play Arkansas. Didn't really know how that one was going to go. I was kind of leaning towards the under. Taylon Green being quote-unquote healthy made me a little interested in, or less interested. Quentin Jackson gets banged up. LSU wins the turnover battle 3-0. They only had 3 TFLs in that game. Arkansas actually put together a decently sound offensive showing. Pretty bad. I'm not going to say it was good, but around the national average in terms of success rate, in terms of yards per play. Taylor Green did not look healthy. Jaquindon Jackson gets banged up. I'm not sure where I'm at with LSU necessarily being this juggernaut all of a sudden on the offensive side of the ball. Okay. Let's just look at how LSU got ahead in some of these games. And look, you're generating turnovers. That's great. But LSU had a scoring drive. Now, look, they got the 34, so they still put it on them. But they had a scoring drive of 6 plays, 7 yards for a field goal. They had a scoring drive of 1 play for 2 yards off an interception. I don't know. They opened the game with a touchdown drive for a 75-yard touchdown. That looks great. But off of that, not a lot of these drives were short fields off of turnovers. You're going to play a Texas A&M team that is coming in a little bit more healthy. I'm going to talk about their defensive line injuries in just a second. But Arkansas had to abandon pretty fast their preferred game script of keeping this one on the ground. What if Texas A&M's offensive line is able to bully ball LSU a little bit more? We have mentioned on the pod, Ole Miss, that offensive line has dealt with some injuries over the last handful of weeks. Arkansas, while they were able against Tennessee to play keep away, they had to abandon that pretty fast against LSU. That offensive line only ranked 72nd in line yards. They've allowed 43 tackles for a loss now. That's 97th in the country. Texas A&M's offensive line, pretty stout. 11th in line yards, only allowed 21 TFLs. They rank 20th in yards per carry. What if A&M's able to stay ahead of schedule and keep that LSU offense on the sideline? Let's talk about that LSU offense. Garrett Nussmeier, who I'm starting to think might be the best quarterback prospect in college football. It was a good effort against Arkansas. I respect this Arkansas defense for sure. LSU only had 5.44 yards per play. The run game continues to be middling at best. They average 4.44 yards per carry. Nussmeier didn't have to do much in this one. 22 or 33, 224 yards. They leaned on Caden Durham. He had 100 yards. But again, it was a run-heavy script because they got ahead and played keep away. On the defensive side of the ball, Nick Scordon on and off the field against Miss State. Mike Elko said he was sick. He should be fine for this one. A few other injuries that are worth monitoring on the Texas A&M sideline, on the Texas A&M side. But I think this Texas A&M defense, I trust Mike Elko. If this LSU offense is still going to be unable to run the ball effectively, I think Mike Elko has the sophistication to maybe give Garrett Nussmeier some different looks. And if Nussmeier is going to be forced to throw the ball 50-plus times, I think Texas A&M's defense, which does have some issues in the secondary, I'd say that's their weak point. I think Texas A&M might be able to scheme this one up because I trust their defensive line to get home. LSU, 86 in EPA per rush. Their offense, 28th in EPA per pass. I just wonder if A&M's able to drop guys back because their defense is able to win at the line of scrimmage. 7th in defensive line yards. 19th in success rate. 11th in havoc. All of a sudden, we have a different outlook on this game. And Texas A&M's able to play from a positive game script. Maybe lessen the load on Connor Wegman, who had a bad showing against Mississippi State, no doubt on the road. Back at home, I find myself leaning with Texas A&M. I haven't gone there yet. I'm going to chew on it a little bit more. But I think some of these matchups might actually side with A&M, kind of my feel towards this one. I kind of might be on an island on that one based on some early line movement with A&M going inside of 3. But I don't know, maybe I get to the window on the Ags. Next up, let's talk Indiana-Washington. Obviously, the big news out of Bloomington. Meanwhile, everyone, I went on a podcast last week. Some guy was talking Indiana make the play. Some guy gave out on the podcast I went on, Indiana make the playoff before the season. And I thought I was high on the Hoosiers, taking their win total in the Big Ten preview. Nope. This guy, I honestly, it's always like the worst where like you really like a team, you want to get in on a team, but you don't know how high to really take their ceiling. And Indiana make the playoff. I mean, we'll see if they could get it home. But it's going to be a little bit harder now that Curtis Rourke is going to miss this game against Washington with a thumb injury. We'll see how long it goes. It might be a few weeks, but we'll see. The Hoosiers welcome Washington, who got their a long-awaited bye week. This is an interesting matchup. Taven Jackson he's going to start for Indiana. He got some serious run in the Nebraska game. The game was pretty much garbage time after halftime, but the Indiana offense did not stop. They absolutely kicked Nebraska's teeth in. Like, really, I mean, fuck this team up. They end up winning the game 56-7 at home. I don't care how good or bad you are. If you're Nebraska, that's an awful, awful look to lose like that. But besides the point, Taven Jackson comes in, keeps the line moving. 7 of 8, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns. I trust this coaching staff to have a game plan for the Hoosiers to keep this team correct. And I do think they can maybe implement a ground-heavy scheme. You look at where Washington's most vulnerable, it's on the defensive line. They check in 93rd in defensive line yards, 97th in EPA per rush. They've only forced 6 turnovers on the year. Now, where does this team thrive? Against the pass. They actually rank as the best passing defense in the country, number 1. That being said, you look at who they've played. It's not a murderer's row of passing offense. You go back there, you got Iowa, Rutgers, Michigan, Wazoo. I don't know if Mateer really qualifies as a high-level passer. He's more of a junk ball player. So pretty easy schedule, but this Indiana passing offense with Taven Jackson in might actually look closer to that than with Curtis Rourke. So what was going to be an interesting schematic matchup between Washington and Indiana, now Indiana might need to really load up against the run. And I wonder what Steve Belichick's going to do with an extra week of prep. He's actually, in my opinion, done a really solid job in his first year as a DC at Washington. Now you look at the other side of the ball with Washington. I think Washington is a pretty superior offense to Nebraska's. I mentioned some of the concerns with Nebraska's offense going into that one against Indiana. I ended up on that under. Did not work because Indiana scored 56 points. I was not part of that. I probably should have just taken the team total under on Nebraska, but such is life. Washington, I do think, has a higher floor than Nebraska. The offensive line has been really strong. A new look unit for Washington, and they've really showed up. They're 7th in offensive line yards. Will Rogers, veteran from the SEC, he's looked the part. This team is 13th in EPA per pass. Run game with Jonah Coleman, also really solid. Flurry with about 5 yards per carry. Of course, they're facing a really stingy Indiana defense. But again, I question, has Indiana seen a diverse offense that could kind of mix and match with the offense and mix and match the offense with the run and pass game? I think this is an interesting schematic matchup. Obviously, my numbers loved Indiana going into this one. My numbers are obsessed with Indiana. I think everybody's power ratings love the Hoosiers. I think I got to sit on the sideline with this one. I honestly think you got to lean with Washington based off some of the concerns you have for Indiana with going to Taven Jackson. Curtis Rourke has been fantastic this season. And I think it's fair to question, where is the state of Indiana? They haven't faced a complete offense yet. So it's going to be a no play for me. At a touchdown, I lean towards Washington. I'm just not sure where this game is going to go. I think it's a super, super fascinating data point. Super interesting. You're going to learn a lot about Indiana, obviously. I also am curious. Indiana hasn't trailed this entire season. And I almost want to see, like, when we're talking like big picture, like how high can this team really go and where's the ceiling? I almost wish this team has had to come back at least once instead of just dump trucking these teams. While they are veterans, and I don't doubt how talented this team is and how special this group is, I do wonder what happens if they fall behind, if Washington can maybe put some scoreboard pressure on them with a backup quarterback for Indiana. So it sounds like I'm bad-mouthing Indiana. Listen, I'm Mr. Hoosier, but I am curious where this game is going to go. I can't see myself getting involved here. Washington is absolutely live because I think they really can match up with Indiana, and I think that this is an interesting test for the Hoosiers, but we'll see. It's going to be a very interesting game. Last note, and we mentioned it on last week's episode with Nebraska. I mentioned Nebraska was like 125th or something in special teams, and Indiana was number 1 according to Bill Connolly's SP+. You want to talk about a matchup nightmare and what can determine the game yet again? What do you know? It's special teams. It is the third unit, the forgotten unit on the field. If you go over to Bill Connolly's SP+, and I use that because that's a publicly available, respected metric, the Indiana Hoosiers check in 12th in special teams. They actually fell off from last week. I'm sorry. 12th in special teams, according to SP Plus. Washington, 133rd. There are 134 teams in college football. So keep an eye out for the special teams, the forgotten unit on the field. And we will see if that determines the game. Because actually, we were talking about special teams could play a huge role in the IU-Nebraska game. I believe it was the first kickoff that Nebraska took back. They stepped out of bounds at the 1 yard line, had to start their drive from the 1 in the first quarter and really put them behind the 8 ball. So we'll see how Indiana, Washington goes and see if special teams can maybe play a role in that one. All right, Boise State, UNLV. I don't necessarily trust either defense in this one. And to set the stage, we got Boise State, a 3-point favorite, total up to 66.5. I don't trust either defense. But if I were to trust one, it would be UNLV's defense. This will be, and I know the rest advantage really lies with Boise State coming off a bye. UNLV, they now are coming back from Corvallis, a really tough place to travel to. They come back to Vegas. But this will be the first defense that Boise State has faced that's inside the top 50 in yards per carry allowed. And obviously, this Boise State offense runs through Ashton Jeanty. I'll talk about Ashton Jeanty's Heisman case in a second. I'll do like a little Heisman tangent. But if this game falls on Maddox Madsen, I'm curious how this goes for Boise State. And I'm not doubting that there are going to be points on both sides. But Maddox Madsen this season has 3 big-time throws to 7 turnover-worthy plays. When under pressure, he's completing 38% of his passes. When he's throwing deep, it's non-existent. He's completing about north of 50. I'm doing the math really quick in my head. Yeah, 50%. He's completing about 50% of his passes, more than 10 yards down the field. This UNLV defense is much improved. And while I had my concerns about them against Oregon State, they really, and again, Oregon State is much worse than Boise State, but I left that UNLV game against Oregon State, a game where I bet the over. You want to do some self-evaluation after some of these bets. Landed on 58. Oregon State nearly stole this game and forced a tie and got it over at the final play of the game. But I look back, and UNLV in that game, 9 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. And I'm not saying Oregon State's a world beater, and Boise State is a pretty formidable offensive line, but that was a pretty moving effort for me. When you look at Boise State, I just mentioned it's a fine offensive line, but 66 in pass block grade. What if UNLV is able to dictate this game and put them into obvious passing situations and get to the quarterback? The rest situation doesn't really scream UNLV and the schedule spot, but I really haven't been impressed with Boise State all that much this year. The Oregon result is aging really well, but you go back through their schedule, like I don't really think much of Wazoo's defense. I'm looking for the really, really dominant effort. Remember when they should have lost to Georgia Southern? Okay, you hung 62 on Utah State. Didn't UNLV just basically do the same thing? They slogged throughout Hawaii. I don't know. And then I look at the other side of the ball, Boise State's defense. So they rank number 1 in sacks. So again, like, can this defensive line wreak havoc? Absolutely can. Not ruling that out. But they're also 96 in EPA per play. So if they're not getting in the backfield, they are letting up a ton of explosives. 99th in EPA per rush, or explosive rush, 120th in explosive pass defense. And they only have 5 turnovers gained. They really aren't, this is a boom or bust defense. If they're not getting to the backfield, they're kind of getting cooked. So I'm a little concerned if UNLV is able to hit a few. Also, really key stat, like you want something, I guess like maybe I should do this more often, but you want something that can maybe determine this game. look at what Boise State does on third down in this game. Boise State's 125th in third down conversion percentage. They're allowing teams to pick up more than 46% of their third downs. If UNLV is able to stay on the field and keep that Boise State team on the sideline, maybe this game is different. And part of me wonders what if the Boise State UNLV game is like the Syracuse UNLV game, where UNLV was on the field for like 40 plays, but they scored 40 points because they were just ripping off explosives and they had like block punts because Ricky White is an amazing special teams player. I wonder if this game looks similar to that. Maybe that's what determines it. But again, not a game I've played, but I'm really finding myself siding with UNLV. A lot of the thoughts I have just come up with a UNLV lean, especially at over a field goal at home. I think Boise State's being a little overrated in this one. Last one we'll mention from like these marquee games. What we all thought we would when I was saying the preseason agenda for week 9. Navy Notre Dame at MetLife Stadium. I kind of think Notre Dame is going to curb stomp Navy. In short, we'll start there. I think Notre Dame might be in for a good performance here against Navy. Let's just go through Navy's opponents and let's find the best offense. Let's start offense that they faced. They played Charlotte. I'll do it this way. I'll cross-reference. I got to go through 2 sheets here, but they played Charlotte, who is 121st in EPA per play. They played Air Force, who is 124th in EPA per play. They played UAB, who is 102nd in EPA per play. They played Memphis, who was 43rd in EPA per play. They allowed 44 points in that game. They played Temple, who is 127th in EPA per play, and they played FCS Bucknell, and I don't have that information available. So Memphis, who scored 44 against them. Okay. Just really quick, we've started to narrow these things down. It's not like this isn't a perfect science, but I'm just like painting a picture for what Navy has really gone through this season. Memphis is 65th in EPA per play and outside the top 125 in explosive run and pass defense. And Navy did a number on them for sure. We had Navy in that game on the money line as well. Notre Dame is 3rd in EPA per play. They have a negative EPA per play. The expected points added are negative per play on a per play basis. I don't know, man. I know there's a lot of love for Navy. I know that double digits, Navy, gonna chew clock, Notre Dame, not an explosive team necessarily, but I really think that this might be a serious step up in class for Navy, and Notre Dame can maybe run this up. I am not going to gloss over the fact either that Notre Dame has, of the college football playoff contending teams, the worst loss of all the resumes. If there were tiebreakers, they would lose, if we're going to call it objectively. I know Notre Dame's a big brand and maybe they get over the hump, whatever. It's in Notre Dame's benefit to run it up on an undefeated and ranked Navy team on a neutral field. I know that sounds silly, but it is in their benefit. They're going to say, fuck the troops. They're going to run it up on them. So I have not gone into the window either. There has been some early two-way action, both ways, obviously two-way action. Currently, Notre Dame is a 13.5 point favorite at MetLife with a total of 52. My initial feel on this one is Notre Dame team total over. One market-making book has a team total of 32.5. I think that's where I land on this game. And I know short possessions and stuff, but I really think Notre Dame is in for a good offensive performance in this one. Maybe I end up laying it with Notre Dame because you look back at that Charlotte result. You want to do some box score digging on Navy Charlotte. Charlotte in the 51-17 loss to Navy outgained the midshipmen. Now, I'm overlooking that Charlotte had 5 turnovers in the game, but still point stands that Navy's running it up on these teams. But I can't get there now. They're facing a legitimate opponent. So haven't gotten there yet. I lean towards the Notre Dame team total over, but we'll see on that one. Before we move on with a few more ads to the card, let's talk about our sponsor for today's show, and that's Rithmm. Rithmm is an AI-generated sports betting modeling app. You hear all the time about sports betting models on gambling Twitter. If you're listening to this, you're probably a part of gambling Twitter in some way or some form, and you want to get involved and make your own model. You don't have the tools? Well, Rithmm gives it to you. Hundreds of inputs, a sleek app that makes everything so simple to use. All you have to do is click on the link in the podcast description below and sign up for Rithmm today. Get started. My pressure run model. I had a thesis on an idea. I wanted to test it out using Rithmm's AI-generated models. My pressure run model is hitting at an egregious clip, hitting at over 60% on the entire season. Huge ROI of north of 20% on the year. 45, 25, and 1, all on over-unders. I want to test it. I clicked on Rithmm, a few different inputs, and there you go. They gave me a winning model. Get started with Rithmm today. Again, sign up with the podcast description below. Okay. Gonna motor through a few games that I bet already, and then we'll get out of here. And we'll be back Wednesday with some player props, underdog round robin. I'll have a guest on the show, and I'll probably bring up really quick some of the games we already spoke about. Well, we'll also get a word on a handful of other games. So let's go. That one went through a key number. Let's do first. I'll go rotation order of what I bet. Let's go first to BYU Central Florida. I played over 55.5. Played the stinky dog Oak State last week against BYU. I'm going to go back to the well on this one. UCF with Ja'Cory Brown, I think is an upgrade for this offense. I think you're going to see the offense continue to hum. I mean, RJ Harvey really got it going. Now that there was like somewhat of a threat of a pass from UCF that you had to at least respect it. RJ Harvey went off for over 170 yards in that one. Okay. Let's look at what Oklahoma State did to BYU. And yes, Ollie Gordon had a big start, but it was also Rodney Fields Jr., the freshman backup running back after Ollie Gordon got hurt. He went off as well. Overall, and Garrett Rangel when he was in also had a few nice runs. 99th percentile when compared to games last year for Oklahoma State's run game in terms of EPA per rush last week against BYU. This BYU rush defense is a serious, serious problem. We know that UCF is going to want to go real fast. I think that BYU is right for the taking in this one. Sure, I lean towards the UCF side, but I'd rather just get involved on the spread because I do respect Jake Retzlaff's arm. I think that's BYU offense, 43rd in EPA per pass. With Lassiter, Roberts, I think that you can see UCF still be a problem in the explosive pass department. You got them checking in 85th in explosive pass defense, 116th in explosive rush defense. This is a unit really good against the run, but it's the pass where they're really vulnerable. 81st in EPA per pass. But again, but with UCF's pace and their ability to run it, now that they seem to have an answer at quarterback, BYU's rush defense is going to be up against it. They are 84th in defensive line yards. They do not wreak havoc in the backfield, bottom half of the country in terms of tackles for loss and sacks. I think both teams could push this here. I think it could get pointsy for sure. This is a middling total. I'm closer to like 57.5, 58. So I was happy to grab over 55 in BYU UCF. Okay, let's keep this moving. What else did I bet? Scrolling through. Okay, this one's dancing around touchdown, so you get better. But I played a cheap 6.5 on Texas Tech. And this is really just the grab the down Big 12 team that lost as a favorite last week, play them against the team that had an upset last week in the Big 12 as a big underdog. And it's just buying and selling these teams when it comes to the middle of the Big 12. TCU, 0-4 ATS as a chalk this year. Trends, whatever. Texas Tech, to me, I prefer them as a dog, and I really like this matchup for them where they could really lean on Taj Brooks. TCU's rush defense, outside the top 100 in EPA per rush, outside the top 100 in explosive pass defense. The TCU defense has not forced turnovers for a lick. They are 117th in the country, only 5 turnovers gained on the year, 97th in havoc rate. So this is not this is a team that you want to buy into their upside when they're a big dog, like they were against Utah, or when they were catching points against Kansas, something like that, like as a dog with a money line play with a plus next to it. Not a team where you want them and need them to really show up and play a complete game. We've seen them fail to cover against Stanford. We've seen them fail to cover against Houston as a big favorite. Blown game against UCF. All as favorites. Now, what was the UCF-TCU game? Maybe UCF was a favorite. Somebody flipped a favorite in that game. Now I can't remember. But Texas Tech, meanwhile, the team still scores. Their defense sucks. Don't get me wrong, but backdoor will be wide open to keep this within one score. The offensive line not allowing a lot of negative plays. They're only allowed 9 sacks on the year. They're scoring about 38 points per game, averaging nearly 5 yards a pop. Top 40 in EPA per pass. This offense is still moving the ball well. It's the defense that's holding them back. But again, I don't want either team as a favorite. I want both as a dog where I could buy into some upside here. Yeah, let's do Texas Tech here. Let's get in on Texas Tech. So I'll buy low on Tech. I played 6.5. You can get a 7. That's great. Only a few more. I mentioned Mississippi State, a team that is trending in the right direction. I think I mentioned I actually spoke about both these teams kind of, but Arkansas looking banged up. Taylor Green did not look healthy at all. Maybe he gets more healthy. It was only a bone bruise, so maybe he does get healthier as the week goes on and he starts to get back to a rhythm. But with Jaquindon Jackson not healthy, and I mean, that guy, we played his prop. That wasn't even close. Got hurt. That didn't help. And the game script got away from them anyway. But Jaquindon Jackson, super important to this team. And you look back at, I'm pulling up the quotes from Sam Pittman. You look back at what Sam Pittman said. Looks like he's not going to go based on his quotes. I don't have the full quote, but let's see now what Mississippi State can do. A team that is starting to compile together some positive data points. At first it was, Texas, Georgia, they don't want to run it up on them, whatever, Van Buren. But you go through Mississippi State's results, and all of a sudden starting to paint a pretty nice picture on honestly both sides of the ball. Miss State, I know they're 1-6, but this team is still playing for something, and they're covering spreads. That's 3 in a row now that they've covered out since going to Van Buren. Covered 37.5 against Texas, covered 34.5 against Georgia, covered 21.5 against Texas A&M. Those are 3 elite defenses. Now you're playing Arkansas, a team where I respect the defensive line, no doubt, but you're going through what Miss State has been able to do with Van Buren, and now Jeff Levy starting to maybe get something going as a first-year head coach and starting to improve the team's play. The team is where's Van Buren's stats? Again, limiting the turnovers. Only no turnovers against Texas A&M. They're playing as clean a ball as they could face. Again, it's ugly box scores, but how about when they ran it up on Georgia for 31? You now look at Arkansas, really, really stout against the run, but it's actually the pass where Miss State wants to go with Jeff Levy's offense. And let me just pull up Van Buren's numbers here really quick. Arkansas is outside the top half of the country in terms of EPA per pass. Really good defensive line. So they really do shut down the pass. But Van Buren's playing clean ball here. 6 big-time throws to 2 turnover-worthy plays. pushing the ball down the field with some confidence. He's averaging 12 yards on his A-dot. He's only completing 53% of his passes, but with a total like this, and you got Arkansas all of a sudden limping on the road to play Miss State, a team that's 1-6, and you have nothing to play for. Got bye on deck, or I'm sorry, not a bye on deck. Got Ole Miss at home on deck. Like maybe this is like where you see a bit of a lull from the Hogs. You get up for the Tennessee game, you get your bye, you get up for the LSU game. Now you're on the road to play Miss State. I don't know. My numbers make it more than this, but I don't think my numbers are capturing the state of Mississippi State and where this team might be going with Van Buren with 3 straight covers. So maybe I'm buying too much into that, and now this is too much of an expectation. But I think with 7, you could take Miss State as a home dog. I actually think they're live. I think this team is due for a breakthrough the way they're playing. And last up, before we get out of here, let's do Wazoo, San Diego State over 55.5. I'm not sold on this Wazoo defense whatsoever. I think that you go back through what this team has done, especially the last 2 weeks. So Wazoo, I said pull up their schedule now. Play Fresno. Fresno misses 2 field goals, pick 6. Kind of a fortunate result in that one to win the game outright, obviously, but also limit Fresno State to only 17 points. I actually thought Fresno, watching pretty much all that game, they left a lot of points out there. And I don't believe in this Washington State team. I'm going to mention a number that from Pro Football Focus in just a second. You look at last week's game against Hawaii, 42-10 in favor of the Cougs. First of all, ton of scoring from Wazoo. That's great. But another misleading less than 20-point outing from the Cougs. Hawaii, 57th percentile success rate in that game, 6.46 yards per play. They couldn't throw because they could not throw because Schrager took 3 sacks, 1 interception. This offensive line is really poor. But you look at the yards here. Wazoo outgained them by about 100 yards, 99 yards. Only 5 tackles for a loss. Won the turnover battle 3-0 here. I think San Diego State, you look at what the state of their team and where they're going. They had a bye last week. Prior to the bye, you're starting to see the results come in for this flash Aztec offense or whatever. 27 at Wyoming, 27 against Hawaii. I just need 20 here to feel good because I do think Wazoo could score. I think Wazoo could score in bunches here against the San Diego State defense. So you look at Washington State still over the balance of the season, 87th in EPA per play. They get no pressure, 107th in sacks. Outside top 120 in explosive rush and pass defense, really just thriving off of turnovers. 14th in turnovers gained. If Danny O'Neal and the San Diego State team can play some just clean ball, I think San Diego State could definitely find the end zone at least 3 times. What's their biggest problem? Lack of a run game, offensive line not really giving them much. But that's not where Wazoo thrives. They're able to hit explosives, though, San Diego State, and that's where Wazoo is struggling. San Diego State top 30 in explosive rush and pass rate. Only 4 turnovers allowed on the year, turnovers lost on the year. That's top 5 in the country. If they could play clean ball, I think they could really thrive in this one. Now, on the other side, Wazoo, I think they're going to score. The secondary is the best part of the San Diego State defense, but I think Mateer might run for 200. San Diego State's defensive line, 130th in defensive line yards, 108th in EPA per rush. The defense gets into the backfield, but I think Mateer is way too versatile here. I think Wazoo could really get into the high 30s, and I'm just a little afraid that they could really, really tear it up because they pour it on late. I'm a little afraid of that when I'm thinking, should I take side or total? So I went for total here because I am confident that San Diego State could score. Lastly, last point on Wazoo, this team cannot tackle for shit. 3rd worst tackling grade according to PFF. Only Southern Miss and Akron are worse. So there you have it. There's a few games, less than an hour. Did I forget anything else? No, I think that's it. I think that this was a nice, scheduling thing happened right before the show. So had to do this one on the fly, solo pod, hit a few of the bigger games, a few of the games I've already bet. Going to do it in reverse this week. We'll bring on a guest for the Thursday show. Until then, you want to find all my plays from the show, hit the early read tracker, show bet tracker. It's in the Google Doc in the podcast description. Make sure you sign up for Rithmm while you're down there. You can also find all my plays in real time on my betstamp. That's RW33. You can follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach for all my random musings. It's Nets basketball season starts tonight while you're listening to this. So I apologize in advance for all the Nets tweets. They're going to be terrible. So you really might want to maybe mute Nets and my name when I tweet about them. But to recap the best bets, we got Wazoo over 55.5. We got BYU over 55.5. Got Texas Tech plus 6.5. We got Miss State plus 7 of a handful more when we get back. But it's a pretty gross card. So it's probably going to be a lower volume week than usual. But until then, enjoy the early week games. Nothing on the early week games for me. That is still available at current. But until then, I'll talk to you guys on Thursday.